All right, well, joining me now, political analyst Michael Maddux. He's a former aide to current council member Teresa Mosqueda, and Nick Licata, a longtime former Seattle City Council member, two gentlemen who know a lot about what's going on in the city of Seattle. And I think the biggest talk leading up to this primary is a desire amongst a lot of people in Seattle to unseat the incumbents that are still running. Nick, I'll start with you because what we're seeing out of these early numbers, that's not happening.
No, the incumbents, in fact, are doing quite well. And I think part of what we're seeing is that there was a tremendous amount of money being spent trying to create, I would say, a perceived wave of rejection of the city council. I think I was on the council 18 years. There were always people upset with the city council. That's not new. But I think the bottom line is that people recognize, at least with those three incumbents, they at least were getting something. They were getting something what they expected. The incumbents that decided not to run, you can hypothesize why they didn't. Some people believe they felt they couldn't win. But the three that remained, I think all felt they could win, and I suspect that they will.
Michael, do you agree with that? Or with some of these races having so many challengers, is the secondary vote being split up amongst them?
You know, I think that you can't necessarily assume that folks who voted for the third, fourth, fifth place candidate in the primary are going to vote for the second place candidate come general election time, particularly for council members Herbold and Juarez. They're both way ahead of where they were at this point in 2015 when they first ran. I think they're in a really good position to be successful going into the general election, particularly given various issues associated with their opponents. In District 3, it's definitely much closer this time around between Councilmember Swanton and Egan Orion, but I do think that she is in a good position, particularly with her really solid fundraising, to be in a good spot to be successful in November.
I want to talk about this concept of dissatisfaction, though. It's not just coming from the Chamber of Commerce pouring in money into this race. We saw a lot of it from actual council meetings themselves. In fact, of course, the infamous case of a man who couldn't get our council members' attention. Take a listen to what one disgruntled resident had to say.
So it was unreasonable for you to ask that people look up and give me their attention?
Sir, you have 2 minutes. We're all looking at you. Have 2 minutes. Now you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Were moments like this a wake-up call for the council in any way, Nick?
Well, there are always going to be disgruntled citizens, rightfully so, that will show up at a city council meeting. And I don't want to say that that particular moment was a wake-up moment. I mean, I think the city council listened to how much opposition there was to what was referred to as the head tax with the employer's tax. And I think that they rightfully decided not to go forward with it because I think they did a very, poor job of explaining what it was. And as a result, they decided that if they were to go forward with a major piece of legislation that was going to have tax impacts, they wanted to make sure that everyone felt comfortable with it and understood it. And so they made the right decision. It was a very logical decision.
They might have come to a decision that you thought was right, but it was tumultuous leading up. In fact, we can show exactly what happened in council during those times.
Adjourn the meeting. Adjourn the meeting. Yeah, just adjourn.
I mean, all of that back and forth. I mean, we remember what the city looked like in that moment. We remembered all of the towns outside of Seattle looking at exactly what was going on right here in the heart of our politics. Michael, what did we learn from this situation here?
You know, I was there. I worked for Councilmember Mosqueda when all that was happening, and I was actually just recovering from being run over by a car while biking home.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it was a very intense time.
You remember it well.
And yeah, and I think that one of the things that we ran into there was, council, whether directly or not, allowed there to be this idea created that there was no sort of spending plan associated with the employee hours tax. And at the same time, Councilmember Sawant, who was not part of what we called the core four of members, went out and started calling it the Amazon tax and went completely off message. And what we saw was some of the more economically conservative business interests ran with that, and we saw the Seattle Times run with it. We saw media run with that because that was much more exciting than getting into the nuance of what we were trying to do. And then we saw the end result, which was a repeal by the council of the EHT in order to ideally look for something else and work with the mayor's office to get to something else. I think that we're seeing a lot of consternation in the city, rightfully so, around tents, around folks sleeping outdoors or in RVs, and a lot of that's being directed at this council, even though at the end of the day, the council has continually tried to provide avenues for the mayor's office to actually implement meaningful solutions, and they just haven't been implemented.
We haven't seen a lot of progress on this front. To that point, we can look at District 3 and Shama Sawant's race. Regardless of what happened with the head tax, she's still leading that, and that was the most expensive race here in Seattle City Council. We're talking about over $450,000 spent on this one race alone, and it's just the primaries. So as we're seeing across the board, the incumbents that are running for re-election, they still are leading their charge. I want to ask you, we only have 30 seconds left. You can see it on the clock. But outside of Seattle City Council, there's one race that both of you are a little surprised by, and that's Larry Gossett's county seat. Nick, what is the message when he's looking at possibly losing that seat? What do you think is coming of that? What are people looking for?
I think that in some ways there's no more respected politician in King County than Larry Gossett. But I also believe that, like many people in politics, if you're in office too long, people begin to yearn for something different. It's not the fault of the politician, it's just they've been there so long. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, we'll see what happens. I'm going to have to leave it there. Michael Maddux, Nick Licata, thank you both so much. Guys, back to you.
All right, we appreciate your time. We're also